All right, joining us now, House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Leader, it's a great pleasure to welcome you.
Yes, thank you for being here this morning, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for getting up with us. Okay, Leader Jeffries, I want to start by asking you about this. There's this headline in the New Republic that reads that Hakeem Jeffries has opened the door to replacing Biden. It notes that you didn't answer directly when asked whether President Biden was the Democratic Party's best messenger. I know that you posted on social media Saturday that a setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback vote. Would you like to respond to this assertion that you may have opened the door? Like, where are you? Just make it plain for folks, please.
Well, thanks for asking that question. I think it was an unnecessarily sensational headline, but that's the moment that we exist in. I've been very clear that it was an underwhelming performance on Thursday during the debate, as President Biden and his campaign have acknowledged. It certainly was a setback. But, of course, I believe a setback is nothing more than a setup for a comeback. And the reality is Joe Biden has confronted and had to come back from tragedy, from trials, from tribulations throughout his entire life. So the moment that we're in right now is a comeback moment, and it's going to require all of us to lean in, articulate a forward-looking message as to why the Democratic platform is best equipped to deal with the challenges facing the American people, beginning with making sure that every single person in this country has economic opportunity and the ability to experience the American dream.
Leader Jeffries, when we talk about the chattering class, in part what we're talking about are members of your caucus who've been speaking with the press on background about their questions about President Biden's candidacy. What do you say to members of your own caucus who are expressing this concern?
Well, we're in the process of having conversations with various parts of the House Democratic Caucus. That's ongoing. That will continue. We are in recess next week for the 4th of July holiday, so we'll have to have those conversations over the phone and virtually, and we'll continue to do that. But one thing should be clear. There is a big difference between our view of the world, the country, and the future, and the extreme MAGA Republican view. We know that President Biden is a good man, an honorable man, and a hardworking family man. We're running against a con man who lied his way through the entire debate on Thursday, lied about COVID, lied about the economy, lied about Roe v. Wade, lied about January 6th, lied about prescription drug pricing, lied about veterans. It was extraordinary. So this is a dangerous moment that we confront. It's an all-hands-on-deck moment. We've got to lean in articulating that clear contrast on the economy, on democracy, on reproductive freedom. And that's the mission that's in front of us over the next few days, next few weeks.
Speaker, I want to shift gears.
Oh, you called him Speaker. Look at you.
I'm sorry.
Look at you forecasting.
Where'd that come from? Where'd that come from? Leader Jeffries, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the Chevron ruling this past week, where basically you had Justice Elena Kagan, in her dissenting opinion, note that the court is seizing power for itself from federal agencies, where now the court will be the arbiter of what works, doesn't work, what the regulations should say or not say. How are you assessing that ruling in light of congressional power? Because this really is, in many respects, sir, a pull to the court, where the court is going to decide what the EPA rules should be, or the court's going to decide what some of the financial markets, how they should look. They're not experts. How does Congress respond to Chevron?
Well, the court has once again demonstrated that it is part of a right-wing effort to jam their extreme ideology down the throats of the American people in ways that are increasingly becoming undemocratic. Because, Michael, as you've pointed out, that Congress, particularly the House, designed as the institution closest to the people, and the Senate, of course, elected to be representatives of the American people, should have the ability to determine and set public policy outcomes that can then be interpreted or put into place by the executive branch. Not unelected judges with no accountability because the constitutional fabric gives them lifetime tenure. And so I think we're going to have to make sure that as we proceed moving forward with consumer protections, combating the climate crisis, protecting the health and the safety and the economic well-being of the American people, that we proceed with the precision necessary to avoid extreme right-wing judges on the federal bench misinterpreting our intentions and thereby undermining our ability to look out for the American people.
Leader Jeffries, I'm sorry, Alicia.
No, go ahead, Simone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Leader Jeffries, I mean, just along these lines of the Supreme Court, are you concerned about what they could potentially do on Monday, that they have held this immunity decision from Donald about not just President Trump, but the presidency writ large until the end of the term? Because it seems to me that they've either decided that the president can be a king or a queen, and they just wanted to wait and tell us until the last moment, or they've decided that the president is not a king nor a queen, and they don't want Donald Trump to know until the last possible moment.
Yeah, it's very concerning, and I understand why there's a high degree of anxiety, because this should be crystal clear. America is not a monarchy. We're not an autocracy. We don't have kings or rulers or dictators. We are a democracy. In a democracy, one principle should be clear. No one is above the law. That includes presidents and former presidents. It certainly includes Donald Trump. And so I'm hopeful that at least 5 justices on the Supreme Court will make the right decision so we can proceed in a manner consistent with the framers of the Constitution, who broke free from a monarchy to create something different, a nation anchored in the rule of law.
Leader Jeffries, to get to the stakes of this upcoming election, there is a new ad from the Biden-Harris campaign. It was released this Friday, and it really tries to draw this contrast. Take a look.
Suckers and losers. On January 6th, we were respected all over the world. They're taking black jobs. I put 3 great Supreme Court justices on the court, and they happened to vote in favor of killing Roe v. Wade. It's been a great thing. My retribution is going to be a success.
So much to choose from there, Leader Jeffries, but why don't we start with the concept of a black job? What does that mean to you?
I have no idea, but we know that Donald Trump is the quintessential racial arsonist. He can't help himself. And so sometimes he tells on himself, and that occurred on Thursday. What I do know as well is that under the leadership of President Joe Biden, we've seen record job creation for the American people, including for African-American women and men across the board. We've seen record investment in historically black colleges and universities and Hispanic-serving institutions, and we've seen record creation of small business and entrepreneurial opportunities. So President Joe Biden and Democrats have an expansive view of an economy that works for everyone, and that includes the opportunity, of course, to be part of the middle class and to go beyond the middle class.
Leader, how do you make that case to the American people in light of the noise now about the president being pulled off the ticket, the movement that Trump is claiming that he has among constituencies that have been traditionally aligned with Democrats, African-American and Hispanic men, for example? How do you make that case, and why do you think it hasn't landed that well with a lot of voters out there?
Well, I think that we have to continue to talk with simplicity and consistently to the American people, to the African-American community, of course, to rural America, to the heartland of America, to Latinos and Asian Americans, and the wonderful, gorgeous mosaic that represents the United States of America. Let's take a step back for a minute. President Joe Biden walked into office on day 1 and had to deal with 3 different catastrophes. He had a public health catastrophe because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the horrible management of the former president. He had an economic catastrophe connected to COVID-19 and the shutdown of the economy. And he had a democracy catastrophe at the same time because of the January 6th insurrection incited by Donald Trump. And he's been managing it incredibly well. We have to emerge from that. Real progress has been made, but also acknowledge that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly to lower the cost of living in the United States of America.
All right, so Leader, I'd like you to stick around because we do want to talk to you about the road for Democrats to win the House this November. You're watching The Weekend.
House Republicans are laying the groundwork for a funding fight this coming fall. The Washington Post points out the GOP is attempting to push through party line legislation that abandons the deal struck with President Biden last year on spending caps and tucked away in the fine print controversial policy provisions. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries back with us.
So, Leader, there's a lot clearly going on in the House. Republicans recognizing some of the writing on the wall about what the House may look like next year. Certainly, even in your own ranks, you had an upset this past week with Jamal Bowman losing his race to County Executive George Latimer. But the headlines for Politico, I thought, was very interesting, noting you know, the party leader endorsed his embattled colleague, but has also taken on Bowman's liberal allies in other New York Democratic skirmishes, saying, you're not that worried. You're not that upset about Bowman's loss. How do you assess this situation with Bowman? I mean, yes, you still have a Democrat who will likely win that seat. But what does that say to you about the changes that are occurring within your own ranks as you look to the future? Possibly of running the House?
I think at the end of any election cycle, we assess what happened in different primaries, certainly in the general election, and try to figure out what lessons can be learned from that. But it makes sense to do that at the end of the election cycle and not take a different race here and there as a snapshot. What I will say is that Congressman Jamal Bowman was a tremendous advocate for racial, social, and economic justice, a champion of public education, a champion of public housing, had a real impact on shaping the CHIPS and Science Act, particularly as it related to making sure that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education could be brought to traditionally under-resourced communities. And so that advocacy will be missed. We respected the decision that was made by the voters of the Bronx and Westchester in 2020 when Jamal Bowman won. We certainly will continue to respect the decision made by voters across the country, and in this particular instance, by the people of the Bronx and Westchester in 2024 with the election of George Latimer.
So, Leader Jeffries, then along those lines, I am looking at the map for 2024, and I have long since said that the map is favored across the board for the House of Representatives for Democrats. If you look at, even with what happened in New York with the redistricting, the maps that were drawn, I'm looking at the new districts that have been created in Alabama and in Louisiana. I am looking at the strength of the frontline members that have been identified by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. It looks like this is an election where House Democrats especially, and even some members who are up for re-election in the Senate on the House side, are running 5, 10 points ahead of where the president is in their states and their respective districts. Do you feel good about House Democrats' prospects this November and going from Leader Jeffries to Speaker Jeffries?
Well, in terms of our prospects, our frontline members are incredibly strong. They've delivered for their districts. They're connected to the communities that they represent. Our red to blue candidates are incredibly strong, and they're out in their communities running hard, articulating a forward-looking vision. And, Simone, we have a strong map, a map that allows us to go on offense with opportunities all across the country, in New York, in California, in the heartland, in the battleground states, and thanks to a surprisingly enlightened Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act, real opportunities in Alabama and in Louisiana. But at the end of the day, we've got to focus on the contrast, division. We've tried to govern over the last 18 months in a reasonable, responsible, and results-oriented fashion, and contrast that with the chaos, the dysfunction, and the extremism that has consistently come from the other side of the aisle. We have a vision of lowering housing costs, ending price gouging, and growing the middle class. We can contrast that with the extreme MAGA Republicans who simply want another big tax cut for the wealthy, the well-off, the well-connected, and their big donors. We believe that we can make the case that House Democrats, in partnership with President Biden, Vice President Harris, Senate Democrats, are best positioned to deliver for the well-being economically of the American people while protecting reproductive freedom and defending our democracy.
Well, let's talk, Leader Jeffries, about how that extremism shows up in this GOP spending bill. So here's part of their wish list. Labor, education, health and human services cuts, $600 million to erect a wall along the southern border. We know how well that went last time. Prohibit funding for military service members to travel for reproductive health care and, quote, drag queen activities. These are not serious people, Leader Jeffries.
Well, these are very unserious people, and of course it's a House Republican conference that in many ways is being run by individuals like Marjorie Taylor Greene. She continues to drive the agenda. That's one of the only ways that you can reasonably explain the extreme nature of the spending bills that are highly partisan and that House Republicans are putting on the floor of the People's House. Because as was mentioned earlier, we reached an agreement in May of last year connected to the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act. Yet, House Republicans have walked away from that agreement at the moment. They want to march us toward a government shutdown. They want to cut $75 billion out of non-defense discretionary spending. That will hurt working families, hurt the middle class, hurt our seniors, certainly hurt children and veterans, particularly when it comes to nutritional assistance, educational opportunities, and health care. Their budget framework is a disaster. And we're going to point that out over the next few weeks, next few months, and make sure that clear contrast is drawn for the American people. We will continue to put people over politics as House Democrats.
Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, thank you so much for being with us.